My 8-year-old granddaughter whispered, "Don't eat the birthday cake, Grandpa," at my 75th birthday party. I thought she was being silly. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The afternoon sunlight streamed through my kitchen windows as I watched my daughter-in-law Rebecca arrange white roses in a crystal vase, her movements precise and calculated like everything else she did. The house buzzed with preparation for my 75th birthday celebration, what I thought would be a joyful family gathering to mark another year of life well lived. "Harold, you just relax and let us handle everything," Rebecca said without looking up from the roses, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness she had perfected over the years. "Today is all about celebrating you. My name is Dr. Harold Peterson, and at 75 years old, I never imagined that my birthday celebration would become the day I learned how little my life meant to the people I had spent decades supporting unconditionally. Had retired from my neurology practice 6 years earlier, after 42 years of treating patients and building what I had thought was a comfortable nest egg. The house in Connecticut had been paid off for decades, my retirement accounts were substantial, and I had always believed my son Marcus would appreciate the financial security I had worked so hard to provide. But as I watched Rebecca fuss over party decorations with desperate intensity, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this celebration. More urgent, more important to them than it was to me. The way she kept checking her phone, the way her hands trembled slightly as she arranged flowers, these weren't the movements of someone excited about a party. The financial parasitism had been escalating for years, though I had been too generous to see it clearly. It started small after Marcus married Rebecca 8 years ago. "Dad, we just need a little help with the wedding costs. Rebecca's family has certain expectations." That little help turned into $35,000. Then came the house down payment. "Just a loan, Dad. We'll pay you back when the market improves." Another $80,000. Each request came with elaborate justifications. Marcus would arrive at my house with spreadsheets, projections, detailed explanations of how this investment in their future would eventually benefit everyone. Rebecca would sit beside him, her blue eyes filling with practiced tears as she talked about their dreams, their plans for giving me grandchildren, their vision of family dinners and holiday traditions. I had fallen for it every time because I wanted to believe that my son had simply made some poor financial decisions that could be corrected with guidance and support. I ignored the pattern that was forming, the way each emergency was somehow my fault for not preventing it, the way each loan became a gift that was never mentioned again. The breaking point should have been last Christmas when Marcus asked for $45,000 to avoid bankruptcy. I had written the check because Emma was there, 8 years old and glowing with Christmas excitement, and I couldn't bear the thought of her holiday being ruined by her parents' financial crisis. But even as I handed over that check, I noticed something that chilled me. Marcus didn't look grateful or embarrassed. He looked entitled, as if I had finally paid a debt that was long overdue. "Where's little Emma?" I asked, referring to my 8-year-old granddaughter, the bright light in my life who filled my days with laughter and endless questions about everything from why clouds moved to how the brain could store memories. "She's upstairs getting dressed," Rebecca replied tersely, her movements becoming more agitated. "Marcus is picking up the cake from that exclusive bakery in Hartford. He insisted on getting it from the most expensive place in the state, said nothing was too good for his father's milestone birthday." The emphasis she placed on milestone sent an odd chill through me. Her tone made this 75th birthday sound more like a final destination than a celebration. The way she said it reminded me of how medical colleagues would discuss terminal patients, with careful, measured words that acknowledged an approaching end. I had always maintained a complex relationship with Marcus. After his mother died when he was 17, we had struggled to connect naturally. Margaret had been the emotional translator between us, the one who helped me understand Marcus's artistic temperament and helped him forgive my workaholic tendencies. During those grief-stricken months after the funeral, Marcus had blamed me for spending too much time at the hospital and not enough time fighting for his mother's life. "You save everyone else's family," he had screamed during one particularly painful argument, "but you couldn't save your own wife." The accusation was unfair but not entirely wrong. I had thrown myself into work as a way of avoiding the crushing reality of Margaret's illness. While she was undergoing chemotherapy, I was performing emergency brain surgeries. While she needed emotional support, I was reviewing medical journals and consulting on difficult cases. Marcus never quite forgave me for those lost months, and I never quite forgave myself. Our relationship had been built on guilt and obligation, ever since. My guilt for failing his mother, his obligation to accept my financial support as compensation for emotional neglect. Rebecca had recognized this dynamic immediately when she entered our family. She understood that my generosity toward Marcus was driven by guilt, not love, and she had spent 8 years weaponizing that knowledge. Every request for money came with subtle reminders of my past failures as a father. Every crisis was somehow connected to the emotional damage I had caused by being absent during his mother's final months. "You know, Harold," Rebecca would say during family dinners, "Marcus still has nightmares about those months when Margaret was sick. He wakes up crying sometimes, talking about how alone he felt." Then she would pause, letting the implication hang in the air before adding, "But he's working through it. The therapy sessions are expensive, but they're helping." Of course, I would offer to pay for the therapy, and the therapy bills would somehow become car payments, vacation costs, or designer handbags that Rebecca needed for her mental health. "Dad, we're back." Marcus's voice echoed through the front door as he entered carrying an enormous white cake box tied with silver ribbon. At 43, he still carried himself with the confident swagger of someone who expected the world to accommodate his needs, though stress lines around his eyes had deepened considerably over the past year. But today there was something different about his demeanor, a nervous energy that seemed barely contained. His hands shook slightly as he set down the cake box, and I observed a thin film of sweat on his forehead, despite the cool October weather. "Traffic was absolutely brutal coming back from Hartford," he continued, setting the cake box on the granite counter with exaggerated care. "But nothing's too good for the old man's big celebration, right?" The phrase "old man" cut deeper than it should have. When had I become the old man instead of Dad or Harold? When had my age become something that defined me rather than simply described me? I was 75, yes, but I still felt vital, still played tennis twice a week, still consulted on complex medical cases for former colleagues. But lately, Marcus and Rebecca had been emphasizing my age at every opportunity, treating me like a fragile relic who might break at any moment. "Dad, at your age, you really shouldn't be climbing ladders." "Harold, men your age need to be more careful about their heart health." Maybe it's time to start thinking about what happens when you're not around anymore. Looking back, I realize they were conditioning everyone, including me, to accept that my death wouldn't be shocking or suspicious. Just a 75-year-old man whose time had naturally come. "Let me see this masterpiece," I said, reaching toward the elaborate cake box, curious about what could have required such secrecy and expense. "No peeking!" Rebecca slapped my hand away with surprising aggression, her voice sharp with panic. "It's a complete surprise. Marcus spent an absolute fortune making sure everything was perfect." The force of her reaction was startling. Rebecca had always been controlling, micromanaging every family gathering down to the smallest details. But this was different. More desperate, more protective of whatever was in that box. Her eyes darted between Marcus and the cake with an intensity that seemed almost manic. "A fortune we were happy to spend," Marcus added quickly, though his voice suggested otherwise. His smile looked forced, like a mask that might slip at any moment. "Because we wanted this birthday to be unforgettable." The word unforgettable hung in the air with ominous weight. At the time, I thought he meant memorable in a positive way. Now I understand he meant it literally. This would be my last birthday, so it needed to be unforgettable for everyone who witnessed it. Emma bounded down the staircase at that moment, her blonde hair cascading in ringlets tied with pink ribbons that matched her party dress. At 8 years old, she was pure joy, curious, affectionate, and usually the first one to run to her parents with excited chatter about whatever she had been doing. But today, something was different. Instead of rushing to Marcus and Rebecca, Emma came directly to me, bypassing her parents entirely. Her usual bright smile seemed forced, and there were shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept well. "Grandpa Harold!" She launched herself into my arms with desperate enthusiasm, clinging to me as if I might disappear. Are you excited about your special cake? Daddy said it's very, very special. The way she emphasized special wasn't with excitement. It was with concern, as if she had heard that word used in a context that worried her. Her small body was tense against mine, and I could feel her heart beating rapidly through her thin dress. Very special indeed, I said, lifting her up and studying her face more carefully. Did you help choose the flavor? No, she said, her expression becoming even more serious. Daddy said I had to wait in the car while he talked to the bakery people. He said it was confidential grown-up business that little girls shouldn't know about. Her tone made me pause. Emma was an exceptionally observant child, always processing information with the intense curiosity of someone who found the adult world endlessly fascinating. But there was something else in her expression now. Fear. How long did you have to wait in the car, sweetheart? A really long time, she said, glancing nervously at her father. Daddy was in there for almost an hour and he kept coming back to the car to look at his phone and make more calls. He seemed really worried about getting everything exactly right. Marcus's jaw tightened at Emma's innocent revelation. Emma, you're exaggerating. It wasn't that long, and I was just being thorough about the cake design. But I noticed how his hands clenched into fists as he spoke, and how Rebecca shot him a warning look that clearly meant, "Shut up." Grandpa, Emma whispered so quietly that only I could hear, "Can we talk alone later? I have something really important to tell you." Before I could respond, Rebecca appeared beside us with that artificial brightness that meant she was about to take control of the situation. Emma, why don't you go wash your hands and help me set up the dining room? We have lots to do before the guests arrive, but Emma shook her head stubbornly and clung to me more tightly. I want to stay with Grandpa and help him get ready for his party. Don't be silly, Rebecca said, her voice developing an edge of irritation. Grandpa needs time to rest before everyone gets here. You know how tiring parties can be for someone? His age. The comment stung, not because it was necessarily untrue, but because of the calculating way Rebecca said it. She was reminding everyone present, including Emma, that I was old, fragile, and potentially close to death. Actually, I enjoy having Emma nearby, I said, wanting to support my granddaughter's obvious need to stay close to me. She's excellent company, and today is supposed to be about family time. The look that passed between Marcus and Rebecca was unmistakable. Frustration, annoyance, and something else I couldn't quite identify. They needed Emma away from me for some reason, but I couldn't understand why. The next 2 hours passed in party preparation, but I found myself paying closer attention to the family dynamics that I had previously overlooked. There were subtle tensions everywhere, like cracks in a foundation that had been painted over, but never actually repaired. Marcus kept checking his watch obsessively, as if he were operating on some kind of strict timeline. Every few minutes, he would pull out his phone and scroll through what looked like notes or reminders, his expression growing more anxious with each check. Rebecca made numerous trips to the kitchen, ostensibly to check on party preparations, but each time she returned, she seemed more agitated. I could hear her having hushed phone conversations that stopped abruptly whenever anyone approached. Most tellingly, Emma seemed to be walking on eggshells around her parents. Usually she was the center of attention at family gatherings, chattering excitedly and bouncing between adults with fearless enthusiasm. Today, she stayed close to me, speaking in whispers and frequently glancing around as if she expected to be scolded. Emma, come help Mommy in the kitchen, Rebecca called at one point, her voice carrying an undertone of command rather than request. I want to stay with Grandpa, Emma replied, her small hand tightening around mine. Emma. Marcus's voice carried a warning that made my granddaughter flinch. When your mother asks you to do something, you do it immediately. Don't make me ask. Twice. The harshness in his voice was disproportionate to the situation. This wasn't normal parental authority. This was intimidation, and Emma's frightened response told me this wasn't the first time she had been threatened into compliance. It's all right, I said, pulling Emma closer to me. She can help me with whatever I need to do. We're having a lovely conversation about her school projects. Marcus's expression darkened at my interference, but he couldn't argue without seeming unreasonable in front of family. Instead, He shot Emma a look that clearly conveyed there would be consequences later for her defiance. Around 6 o'clock, more family members began arriving. My brother William and his wife Margaret drove up from New York City, bringing their characteristic warmth and humor. Marcus's business partner James arrived with his family, followed by our neighbors the Hendersons, who had become close friends over the years. The house filled with animated conversation and genuine laughter, but I realized how Marcus and Rebecca seemed to be performing rather than participating. Their smiles were too bright, their laughter too loud, their enthusiasm too forced. They were acting like people who were following a script rather than enjoying a spontaneous celebration. "Harold, you look wonderful," Margaret said, hugging me warmly. 75 years young and still as sharp as ever. I hope I have half your energy when I reach your age. "The secret is good genes and better living," I replied. But I observed how Marcus winced at the mention of my apparent vitality. For someone planning a 75th birthday celebration, he seemed oddly disturbed by reminders that the birthday boy was in excellent health. Emma stayed glued to my side throughout the party preparations, more clingy than her typically independent nature would suggest. When other children arrived and began playing in the backyard, Emma remained by my side, as if she were afraid to leave me alone with her parents. "Emma, why don't you go play with the Henderson kids?" Rebecca suggested, gesturing toward the backyard where several children were running around the pool area. "Jenny and Michael have been asking about you all week." "I want to stay with Grandpa," Emma replied firmly, taking my hand. "It's his most important day." I observed how Rebecca's jaw tightened at Emma's response. For just a moment, her carefully maintained composure slipped, and I saw something that looked like rage, or perhaps frustration that her daughter wasn't cooperating with whatever plan was in motion. "You'll have plenty of time with Grandpa later," Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge of impatience that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "Go outside and let the adults have their conversation." But Emma shook her head stubbornly and remained attached to my side. I was touched by her affection, but also puzzled by her unusual behavior. Emma loved playing with other children, and she had been looking forward to seeing Jenny and Michael for weeks. "Actually, I enjoy having Emma nearby," I said, wanting to support my granddaughter's obvious need to stay close. "She's excellent company, and today is about family time." The look that passed between Marcus and Rebecca was unmistakable. Annoyance, frustration, and something else that made my stomach clench with unidentified dread. Around 7 o'clock, I excused myself to use the restroom upstairs. As I passed by the hallway, I overheard Marcus and Rebecca in intense, whispered conversation. They were standing close together, their heads nearly touching, and their voices carried the urgent tone of people discussing something critical. "Has to be before 8:30. Marcus was saying, his voice tight with stress. "Emma's being incredibly difficult," Rebecca replied, her tone sharp with frustration. "Everything depends on the exact timing," Marcus continued. "Once it's done, there's no going back." Rebecca's voice carried a finality that made my blood run cold. "What if someone gets suspicious?" Marcus sounded worried. "No one will suspect anything if we stick to the plan." Rebecca's voice was coldly confident. At the time, I assumed they were discussing some surprise they had arranged for the party. Perhaps a special toast or a gift presentation that required precise timing. But the intensity of their whispered conversation, the way they both looked around nervously to make sure they weren't being overheard, suggested something more significant than party logistics. When I returned downstairs, I found Emma sitting, alone in the living room, looking unusually pensive for an 8-year-old at a party. She was staring out the window at the other children playing, but her expression was distant, almost melancholy. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, sitting beside her on the couch and noticing how she immediately scooted closer to me. She looked around carefully to make sure we weren't being overheard, then leaned close to my ear. "Grandpa, promise me, you'll be very careful tonight." "Careful about what?" "Just everything. Promise me you'll listen to me if I tell you something really important." The seriousness in her voice was unsettling. Emma was usually carefree and optimistic, but today she seemed burdened by knowledge that was too heavy for her young shoulders. Emma, has something been worrying you? You seem different today. She nodded slowly, then whispered, I heard Mommy and Daddy talking about you last night when they thought I was sleeping. They said things that scared me. Before I could ask what she had heard, Rebecca appeared in the doorway with that bright, artificial smile that meant she was about to take control of the situation. There you are, she said, her voice carrying false cheer. Harold, everyone's asking for you in the dining room, and Emma, the other children are waiting for you by the pool. But Emma shook her head and pressed even closer to me. I want to stay with Grandpa. Don't be silly, Rebecca said, her artificial smile becoming more strained. Grandpa needs to visit with his adult guests, and you need to play with children your own age. Actually, I'm enjoying our conversation, I said, noticing how Emma's small body tensed whenever her mother spoke to her. Emma's telling me about her school projects, and I find her company delightful. Rebecca's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw a flash of something that looked like panic. Well, don't tire him out, Emma. Remember, Grandpa's getting older and needs his rest. The casual cruelty of using my age as a weapon, especially in front of Emma, revealed something ugly about Rebecca's character that I had never noticed before. She wasn't just emphasizing my mortality, she was conditioning my granddaughter to expect my death. As evening approached and the sun began setting over our manicured lawn, the atmosphere in the house grew more tense rather than more festive. Marcus continued checking his watch obsessively, while Rebecca moved around the party with manic energy, adjusting decorations that didn't need adjusting and rearranging place settings that were already perfect. Harold, are you feeling all right? William asked, appearing beside me with a concerned expression. You seem a bit distracted tonight. I'm fine, I said, though I wasn't sure that was entirely true. Just taking everything in. It's wonderful to have everyone here. But even as I said the words, I realized they weren't accurate. Something felt wrong about this gathering, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was bothering me. The time came for the traditional birthday ceremony. The dining room had been transformed with elegant decorations, fresh flowers, flickering candles, and place settings on my grandmother's best china. But despite the beautiful presentation, the atmosphere felt more like a funeral than a celebration. Rebecca disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying the most spectacular cake I had ever seen. 4 layers of rich chocolate perfection covered in dark ganache, decorated with intricate white chocolate roses, and topped with exactly 75 golden candles arranged in perfect concentric circles. The cake was a work of art, but something about its perfection seemed almost sinister. Every detail was flawless, from the precise spacing of the candles to the elaborate decorative work. This wasn't just a birthday cake. It was a production, a performance piece designed to make this moment memorable for everyone present. My God, Margaret breathed in amazement. Harold, that's the most beautiful cake I've ever laid eyes on. It must have cost a small fortune. Nothing's too expensive for Dad, Marcus said, but there was something forced in his smile, something that didn't reach his eyes. After everything he's sacrificed for us over the years, he deserves only the absolute best. I realized how he emphasized the phrase sacrificed for us, as if my financial support had been a burden rather than a choice made out of love. There was resentment in his voice, a bitterness that suggested he viewed my generosity as somehow inadequate or grudgingly given. The group gathered around the mahogany dining room table as Rebecca placed the magnificent cake directly in front of my chair. The positioning was deliberate. I was seated at the head of the table, with the cake within easy reach, making it natural and expected that I would be the first to eat. Marcus stood behind my chair, ostensibly to help light the candles, but I noticed how his hands were shaking. Rebecca positioned herself where she could observe my every move, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that felt predatory rather than affectionate. The candles flickered in the dimmed lighting, casting dancing shadows across the faces of people I loved and trusted completely. But as I looked around the table, I realized that not everyone present deserved that trust. Everyone began singing Happy Birthday with the enthusiastic off-key harmony that made such moments precious and memorable. But as the song progressed, I noticed Emma wasn't singing. She stood beside my chair, her small hand resting on my arm, watching the cake with an expression that seemed fearful rather than celebratory. Her eyes weren't on the candles or the beautiful decorations. They were fixed on the cake itself, as if she were staring at something dangerous that might explode at any moment. As the song concluded and everyone applauded enthusiastically, I reached for the silver cake knife Rebecca had placed beside the elaborate dessert. The moment felt ceremonial, almost ritualistic, as if I were about to perform some ancient sacrifice rather than cut a birthday cake. But before I could pick up the knife, I felt Emma's small hand slip into mine with surprising urgency. Her fingers were ice-cold despite the warm room, and I could feel her trembling. She leaned close to my ear, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with desperate conviction that cut through all the party noise like a knife. "Don't eat the birthday cake, Grandpa." I looked down at her, confused by the serious expression on her young face. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her small mouth was pressed into a determined line that reminded me of her grandmother when Margaret had made up her mind about something important. "What did you say, sweetheart?" "Don't eat the cake," she repeated, her 8-year-old face displaying wisdom that seemed far too mature for her age. "Please, Grandpa, promise me you won't eat any of it." The room had gone quiet enough that several people nearby had overheard Emma's whispered words. The festive atmosphere suddenly felt strained, like a balloon that was about to pop. "Emma, that's completely silly," Rebecca said sharply, her voice cutting through the silence like a whip. "Grandpa has to eat his birthday cake. It's the most important tradition." "I don't want him to," Emma said, her voice gaining strength despite her young age and the intimidating attention of all the adults around her. "Something's very wrong with it." An uncomfortable silence fell over the entire group. The festive atmosphere that had taken hours to create evaporated in seconds, replaced by a tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Marcus's jaw tightened visibly, and his hands clenched into fists. I could see the effort it was taking for him to control his reaction, the way his face flushed red with barely contained rage. "Emma, apologize to Grandpa immediately," he said through gritted teeth, his voice carrying a threat that made several guests shift uncomfortably. "We spent an enormous amount of money on this cake, and you're being incredibly rude and disrespectful." But Emma shook her head defiantly and pressed even closer to me. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable now. She was terrified, not just nervous or seeking attention. This was the fear of a child who had witnessed something terrible and was trying to prevent a catastrophe. "I heard you and Mommy talking in the kitchen last night," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "You said that after Grandpa takes his heart medicine and eats the special birthday cake, everything would be completely different forever." My blood turned to ice. Heart medicine. I took a daily prescription for a minor cardiac condition, just a maintenance medication that kept my aging heart beating at a steady rhythm. But Emma was absolutely right. I had taken my evening dose just before the party began, same as always for the past 5 years. "What kind of special cake?" I asked. Quietly, my eyes moving back and forth between Marcus and Rebecca, my medical mind already racing through dangerous possibilities. "It's just chocolate," Rebecca said quickly, too quickly. "Your absolute favorite flavor. We had it specially made with organic premium ingredients because we know you've been carefully watching your diet and health." But her defensive tone triggered every instinct I had developed during 42 years of medical practice. The same instinct that had helped me diagnose countless patients when their families weren't telling me the complete truth about symptoms or medications. "Emma," I said gently, kneeling down to her eye level, "what exactly did you hear about my heart medicine?" "Daddy was on the phone with someone for a really long time," she said, her voice barely audible in the silent room. "He was asking lots of questions about your pills and how they make you sleepy sometimes. And then he asked about what would happen if you took them with other medicine." My hands began to tremble slightly. During my years of practice, I had seen several cases of accidental drug interactions that had proved fatal, particularly in elderly patients whose systems were more sensitive to pharmaceutical combinations. "What else did you hear, sweetheart?" He said the special cake ingredients would make sure you went to sleep tonight and never woke up again. "And then Mommy said it would look like your heart just stopped working because you're old." The words hit the room like a devastating explosion. Several guests gasped audibly in horror. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, and William stood up so quickly his chair toppled over backward. "That's completely ridiculous and impossible," Marcus said, but sweat had broken out across his forehead despite the air conditioning. Emma obviously misunderstood a conversation about making sure Dad gets adequate rest at his age. You know, how kids twist innocent words around and create dramatic stories. But I was already standing, my medical mind racing through the possibilities. My beta blocker medication, when combined with certain sedative substances, could indeed cause fatal cardiac depression. And if someone had researched the drug interactions carefully enough, they could create a combination that would appear to be natural heart failure. What's in the cake, Marcus? My voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades making life-and-death medical decisions. What did you have them put in my birthday cake? Dad, you're being completely paranoid and unreasonable, Marcus said, but he had stepped back from the table, putting distance between himself and the cake as if it were evidence of some horrible crime. Then you won't mind if I have it professionally. Analyzed, I said, reaching for my phone. I know several toxicologists at the hospital who could run comprehensive tests within hours. Stop! The word exploded from Rebecca with desperate, absolute panic. Just, please stop. The admission hung in the air like deadly poison gas. Everyone in the room stared at her in growing horror as they realized what had almost happened, what had been planned for this celebration. What did you put in my cake? I repeated, my voice deadly calm and controlled. Rebecca's perfectly composed mask finally cracked completely. Tears began streaming down her face, though whether from genuine remorse or frustration at being caught, I couldn't determine. Sleeping medication, she whispered, her voice breaking. Just enough to make you very drowsy and disoriented. Combined with your heart medication and your age, it would have looked like completely natural causes, like your heart just quietly stopped during the night. The confession hit the room like a physical blow to everyone present. Margaret began crying openly and uncontrollably. William pulled out his phone, undoubtedly to call the police immediately. James backed away from Marcus as if he had discovered he was standing next to a dangerous criminal. You were going to murder me, I said, the words feeling surreal and impossible as they left my mouth. My own son was going to murder me for my inheritance money. We're drowning financially, Dad. Marcus's carefully constructed facade finally collapsed completely. We owe $300,000 in credit card debt. The house is in foreclosure proceedings. Rebecca's parents have completely cut us off. We were going to lose absolutely everything. So, you decided to kill me instead of asking for help or declaring bankruptcy? We have asked, Rebecca screamed, her voice echoing through the house. We've asked you for money dozens of times over the years, and you always lecture us about fiscal responsibility and living within our means. But you're sitting on millions of dollars while your own family struggles and suffers. The twisted, narcissistic logic was absolutely breathtaking. Because I had refused to fund their irresponsible, extravagant lifestyle indefinitely, they had decided I deserved to die. How long have you been planning my murder? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the horrifying answer. 6 months, Marcus admitted, his voice hollow and defeated. We researched your medications extensively, consulted with people who understood drug interactions. We found a bakery that would add special ingredients to custom orders without asking questions. We even practiced our reactions for when we discovered your body. The methodical, calculated nature of their murder plan was perhaps the most horrifying aspect of this revelation. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperate impulse. They had spent half a year researching how to kill me and make it appear natural. And what about Emma? I looked down at my granddaughter, who was still holding my hand tightly. What was your plan for her after you murdered her grandfather? She wouldn't have understood what happened, Rebecca said defensively, as if that justified everything. She would have grieved for a while and then moved on with her life. Children are naturally resilient and adaptable. The casual dismissal of Emma's emotional well-being, the assumption that an 8-year-old would simply move on from losing her beloved grandfather to her parents' greed, revealed a level of narcissism and emotional emptiness that took my breath away. Emma saved my life, I said, lifting my granddaughter into my arms protectively. While you were plotting my murder for months, your own daughter was protecting me with her honesty and courage. By the time the police arrived 45 minutes later, Marcus and Rebecca had confessed everything in detail to the room full of witnesses. The cake was carefully removed as evidence, along with the remaining sleeping pills Rebecca had hidden in her designer purse. Toxicology reports would later confirm that the dosage, combined with my heart medication and my age, would indeed have been fatal within hours. As the handcuffs clicked around my son's wrists, he looked at me one final time with eyes filled with rage rather than remorse. "This is entirely your fault. Dad, if you had just shared your wealth like a real family member should, none of this would have been necessary." Even in custody, facing charges of attempted murder in the first degree, he remained convinced that my survival was somehow the real tragedy of the evening. The weeks that followed were an exhausting blur of legal proceedings, custody hearings, family therapy sessions, and difficult conversations about Emma's future. Marcus and Rebecca were both sentenced to 18 years in state prison for attempted murder with special circumstances. The judge cited the premeditated nature of their plan and the psychological trauma inflicted on a child as factors in the maximum sentencing. Emma came to live with me permanently, and we began the slow, careful process of healing from trauma no child should ever have to experience. She had saved my life through the simple honesty and moral courage that adults often lose as they learn to compromise their principles for convenience, advantage, or financial gain. "Grandpa," she said one evening as we sat together, reading before bedtime, "why did Mommy and Daddy want to hurt you so badly?" It was a question I had been dreading, but knew was inevitable, and Emma deserved an honest, age-appropriate answer. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people get so worried about money and material things that they forget what's really important in life. They forgot that family means taking care of each other and protecting each other, not hurting each other for personal gain. Will I ever see them again? Someday, when you're much older and feel ready, you can decide if you want to visit them. In prison. But for now, you're completely safe here with me, and we're going to take care of each other like real family should." She nodded solemnly, processing this information with the remarkable resilience that children often possess, then brightened with a smile. "Grandpa, for your next birthday, can we make the cake ourselves? I want to make absolutely sure it's safe and made with love." "Absolutely, Princess. We'll make it together from scratch, and it will be the most delicious, safest, most love-filled cake in the entire world." A year later, on my 76th birthday, Emma and I did indeed make our own cake together. A slightly lopsided chocolate creation decorated with excessive amounts of colorful frosting and rainbow sprinkles that she had insisted would make it extra happy and magical. It was the most beautiful birthday cake I had ever seen in my entire life. As we sat together enjoying our homemade dessert while watching the sunset through our kitchen window, I reflected on how a child's honesty and moral courage had saved not just my life, but my faith in the possibility of genuine love existing without conditions or calculations. The money that Marcus and Rebecca had been so desperately eager to inherit now funds Emma's education and provides for her secure future. But more importantly, she's growing up understanding that wealth means absolutely nothing without integrity, and that the most precious things in life, love, trust, honesty, loyalty, can never be bought, sold, or stolen. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children isn't financial security or material advantages, but the example of living with honor and principles even when it costs us something significant. Emma learned that lesson not from lectures or sermons, but from witnessing her grandfather choose love over revenge, mercy over bitterness, and forgiveness over hatred. She saved my life by refusing to stay silent when she witnessed evil being planned by the people who should have protected her most. Now, I'm absolutely determined to save her emotional and spiritual life by showing her that goodness, kindness, and moral courage still exist in this world, even when the people who should love us unconditionally become the ones we need protection from. The birthday cake that was meant to kill me became the moment that taught us both what family really means. Not blood relations or inherited obligations or financial expectations, but people who choose to protect and cherish each other, especially when it requires tremendous courage to do what's right instead of what's easy. Today, Emma was thriving in school, had made wonderful friends, and volunteered at the local animal shelter every weekend. She was considering becoming a veterinarian when she grew up, inspired by her natural ability to help frightened creatures learn to trust again. Marcus and Rebecca remained in prison, with many years left on their sentences. Emma sends them occasional letters, cheerful updates about school and friends, but nothing that suggests she's waiting for their approval or forgiveness. She has learned to love them from a safe distance. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had a child in your life who showed wisdom and courage beyond their years? Share your experiences with our community. To listen to another story about family courage and unexpected heroes, click on the video suggestion that appears on your screen. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths, and the greatest heroes come in the smallest packages.